So, are we all ready? Cool. So today, as I hope you've already seen, we're looking at the idea of shining brighter. But what does this really mean? Maybe if I was speaking to a room full of fireflies or glowworms, we could take this literally. But from looking at you guys, you look like a bunch of humans, so I guess we're going to have to go a bit deeper than that. Light is far more than just some waves on the electromagnetic spectrum. It's something that we need in order to be able to see. Just think of all the things that you would bump into if we lived in permanent darkness. And light can comfort us. I'm sure at one moment or another, you've all walked down a dark street in the middle of the night and you've felt at least a little bit uneasy. And this might be despite the fact that you've walked down that same street hundreds of times before and you're quite happy during the day, but without the light, it can feel a bit scary. Light can guide us, whether that's a sign or a beacon or a lighthouse, and it can show us the way that we want to go. And for those of you who have read your Bibles, you might also remember from Exodus that God, not content of using a map or a sat-nav, decided to use a pillar of fire to guide his people, Israel, from their slavery in Egypt to their new land of freedom, which he promised them. And you can check that out in Exodus chapter 13 at some point, if you've got a chance. Light can also bring us life. Without light from the sun, we wouldn't have any plants growing, and we wouldn't have any food to eat. And even if you're like me and you don't eat any vegetables. And finally, and maybe most importantly for some, light can entertain us. It can bring us joy. It can turn useless slabs of glass and metal into things that we can snap, play games, and watch cat videos to our heart's content. We also see a close association between light and goodness in our culture. If you just think of all the movies that you've seen where the bad guy is the one who's lurking in the shadows. And it's also the same in the Bible. The Bible draws a link between light and God and his goodness. And this is exactly how God designed it to be. Right from the very beginning, on the first page of your Bible, in Genesis 1, we see that it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. There was evening, and there was morning, the first day." So, what I think is really cool here is that God knows that light is good. So the first thing he did was create light. And when God sees how good the light is, he decides to separate the light from the darkness, designing the two to be separate. However, they're not equal. So if we can just drop the lights for a second, and if you can all stand up and grab your phones. And yeah, some of you have already guessed what we're going to do. If you can turn on your torch mode. And now you can see, despite the fact we've turned pretty much all of the lights off, and you would think it would be pretty dark, your tiny little lights in your phone are managing to push back the darkness. Cool, okay, you can bring your lights back up again. You can pop your phones back away for the moment. These tiny lights, as you've seen, can have a big impact on pushing back the darkness. Okay, you can take a seat. So, the Bible tells us that God himself is light. We see that in John, who was one of Jesus' friends, at the very start of his book, he says that God is light. So if we look at John 1, starting from verse 1, it says, "In the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. From the very beginning, the Word was with God, and through him, God made all things. Not one thing in all creation was made without him. The Word was the source of life, and this life brought light to the people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness will never put it out." So, light is not only good because God made it, but because God and His Word, which is the Bible, is light. A light that can bring life into the darkness. You might be sitting here thinking, well, that's a bit weird. How can I carry light through my life? But the way that we do this is simple. We need to make sure that we have God and His Word, which are light, as an integral part of our lives. When God is part of our lives will become much brighter, more exciting, and full of life because of Him. I want to talk to you this afternoon about a guy called Daniel, who demonstrated being God's light brilliantly. Like most of you, Daniel was a teenager and things were going pretty well for him. He was young, bright, handsome, and lived a comfortable life in the heart of Israel. However, things were about to get pretty tough for him. His country had just been invaded by enemy forces. They terrorised his neighbourhood, they looted all the valuables, and they started capturing innocent civilians and taking them back to the leader of the enemy nation, the ruthless and power-hungry, and should we say, a bit eccentric, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Daniel, as we're about to read, was one of these prisoners who was being dragged off, separated from his family, and sent to serve this tyrant king of Babylon in a far-off land. So let's take a look at that in Daniel chapter 1, which you can follow along on the screen behind me. In the third year that Jeroboam was king of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylonia attacked Jerusalem and surrounded the city. The Lord let him capture King Jeroboam and seize some of his temple treasures. He took some prisoners back with him to the temple of gods in Babylon, and he captured treasures in the temple storerooms. The king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief official, to select some Israelites, exiles, some young men from the royal families and from the noble families. They had to be handsome, intelligent, well-trained, quick to learn, free from physical defects, so that they could be qualified to serve in the royal court. Ashpenaz was to teach them to read and write the Babylonian language. The king gave orders that every day they were to be given the same food and wine as the members of the royal court. After 3 years of this training, they were to appear before the king. Among those chosen were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, all of whom were from the tribe of Judah. The chief official gave them new names, which were Belshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But Daniel made up his mind not to let himself become richly unclean by eating food and drinking the wine of the royal court. So he asked Ashpenaz to help him. God made Ashpenaz sympathetic to Daniel. Ashpenaz, however, was afraid of the king, so he said to Daniel, "The king has decided what you are to eat and drink. And if you don't look as fit as the other young men, he may kill me." I think it seems a bit harsh. So Daniel went to the guard whom Ashpenaz placed in charge of him and his 3 friends. "Test us for 10 days, he said. "Give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare us with the young men who are eating the royal food, of the food of the royal court, and base your decision on how we look." He agreed to let them try it for 10 days. When the time was up, they looked healthier and stronger than all those who had been eating the royal food. So from then on, the guard let them continue to eat the vegetables instead of what the king provided. God gave the 4 young men knowledge and skill in literature and philosophy, and in addition, Daniel skill in interpreting visions and dreams. At the end of the 3 years set by the king, Ashpenaz took the young men to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked to them all, and Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah impressed him far more than any of the others, so they became members of the king's court. No matter what question the king asked, or what problem he raised, these 4 knew 10 times more than any fortune teller, magician in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained at the royal court until Cyrus was emperor of Persia, who conquered Babylonia. So, here we find Daniel in a tough situation. He's now a student, admittedly not at his own choosing, in the Royal Academy. And he's on a fast-track course which will lead him directly into the king's court and the government, with all of the power and influence that comes with that. He'd been picked out as one of only a few out of the whole nation to join this exclusive programme because of his abilities and talents. However, Daniel, who trusted and had a relationship with God, knew that the culture that he was now in the middle of, with all of its varied beliefs, rituals and customs, were a stark contrast from what he knew to be right. He knew that his classmates, teachers and neighbours were all doing things that weren't right. He knew that their worship of idols and of pagan gods, and the way that they lived their lives, and the way that they treated one another, was not the way that God wanted them to live his life. But he also knew that the king, who had a reputation for creatively and painfully torturing and killing those who annoy, disagree or disappoint him, is a strong supporter of these dark customs and beliefs. It would have been so easy for Daniel to just decide to keep his head down and not make a fuss and try and blend in with the rest of his classmates. When he was offered the king's food, we could have expected him to have thought, well, it's not like they're asking me to kill anyone. What harm would be done if I was just to eat that roast pork and wash it down with a glass of wine? After all, it's already been prepared for me, and it would be a shame for it to go to waste. But he didn't. Daniel's decision was not to eat the king's food, and it was about more than the food itself. You may remember that we read in verse 8, it said, Daniel made up his mind not to let himself become ritually unclean by eating the food and drinking the wine of the royal court. Daniel was making the decision not to allow his life, his values, and his measure of right and wrong to be diluted by anyone else, even if that meant standing out from the crowd. Like Daniel, we live in a society where living by God's light, living by God's values, and showing God's love to one another is not the normal thing to do. Like Daniel, our classmates, neighbours and teachers may have a totally different set of values to us. Although in the passage, Daniel's making a stand on the food he ate, this isn't the story of Daniel the fussy eater. This is the story of Daniel, the nation changer, a nation changer while he was still at school, lived about an ordinary life like you and me. And as we often, when we read the Bible, we focus on the exciting bits. So when I was doing this talk, I could have focused on the account when Daniel went and was thrown into a pit of ferocious lions, but God sent angels to shut their mouths and save him, and he got out scot-free because he had trusted God. Similarly, we could have looked at the time when Daniel's friends were thrown into a furnace that was so hot that it killed the jailers that were carrying them to the furnace. But they not only survived, but they didn't have a singe mark on them, and they didn't even smell the smoke afterwards, because they trusted God and God protected them. All three of these stories demonstrate Daniel and his friends trusting God, and their determination not to hide God's light in their lives, and God's power working through them. However, I chose this story because it reminds us that God wants to shine his light through the ordinary as well as the extraordinary. Daniel didn't have to wait until he was thrown into a pit of lions to prove that he trusted God. He could do it where he was, just as an ordinary teenager in school, and we can all do the same. He didn't have to wait until he was in the top job in the king's court to influence people's lives. He chose to use the situation he was in to bring about a revolution in his world, and we can all do the same. Because of Daniel's simple decision to trust God's way was the best way, change started to happen. We see in verses 15 and 16, it says, when the time was up, they looked healthier and stronger than all those who had been eating the royal food. So from then on, the guard let them continue to eat vegetables instead of what the king provided. So Daniel and his mates were stronger and healthier than all of the other students in his school, even without eating the king's fancy food. It doesn't say in the text, but I'd argue this isn't down to the food, the actual difference in the food itself, but rather because they were stronger because God, the God of the universe, the one who we read about earlier that created the universe, was working through these young people, blessing them for their faith and empowering them to bring a little bit of light into their situations. We can all be like Daniel and his mates. We can all be the revolution of God in our schools, our youth groups, our churches and our communities, but it has to start with us. Us making a stand to be different from the crowd. Us doing what is good, godly and right, rather than what is easy. Us choosing to be a people of God's light, rather than settling for the darkness. Us stepping out to shine our light in our community, where it's wet and cold, rather than sitting in the warm and playing video games. Us shining the light online, on YouTube, Instagram and Snapchat, rather than simply following the crowd. We don't have to do big things to make a big difference. So when I was at school, I had a teacher who, when she got angry, would start using God's name as a swear word, and she would do it several times each lesson. This upset me, so what I decided to do, at the end of the lesson, I went and spoke to her and explained that I found her behaviour offensive. At that point, she sort of just shrugged it off and didn't take any notice. So what I decided to do was keep a tally in the margin of my notebook. And I spoke to her again at the end of the lesson, saying what I was going to be doing. And after a few weeks of me doing this, she realised that I was being serious, and slowly from that point, she made the effort to stop doing it, and that actually, the amount that she got angry and started to shout started to fade as well. So why am I telling you this? I'm sure every single one of you sitting in this room can think of one thing that you experience every day that if there was a little bit more of God's light in there, would be far better. And I'm not talking here about big things like war or global inequality. I'm talking about things that you can see change happening right now, where you can bring in your light. If you're stuck for ideas, make sure you go and check out the Inspire Market, which is upstairs in the other building. And we've got a whole bunch of people over there who would love to share with you about what they're up to. Daniel has shown us that shining God's light of love in our lives doesn't mean that we have to be super spiritual or weird. We don't have to go and stand on a street corner shouting, Jesus loves you, although we could. And we don't have to try and ram Bible verses into every conversation that we have. Like Daniel, it can simply start by knowing God. And like in any relationship, this will grow by spending time with Him, which we can do through prayer and worship and giving God the opportunity to speak to us. And we can also learn more about Him through reading His Word, which is the Bible, and talking with our friends who also know Jesus. And just like as when you spend time with your mates, you get an idea of what they like, what they don't like, and what winds them up. The same is true for God. Once we know God, it's easy for us to know what is good and what pleases Him. And it's at this point we can make the decision to trust God and refuse to compromise on what is good, godly, and right. When we do this, like Daniel, God's light will shine through us and will work within us. People will notice that there's something different about us. Something good that they can't quite put their finger on. A lightness that they can't quite explain. If you would like to be like Daniel and proudly stand out from the crowd and not let your fears of what other people might say or think dim your God-given light, or if you simply want to ask God to help you, strengthen you, and give you the opportunity to shine brighter in your life, you can. We are all able to be the revolution in our own lives, and within the lives of our schools and our churches and our friends. Each little piece of light that we bring into the world makes it that little bit brighter and pushes the darkness back. So, if you want to be the one who brings the light to your street, and if you want to be the one who shares the light with your friends, I want you to be brave and shine your light on your phone right now. If you don't have a phone, nick someone else's, or share a phone, yeah. Right, those of you who haven't got your light shining, what I want you to do is pray for these people shining their lights. I'm praying that God will be able to shine a light through them, and we can spark a revolution in this city.